I started as an English learner, an emergent bilingual student myself. Think of speaking and listening as a rehearsal or a prerequisite to reading and writing. Dr. Cardona realizes and recognizes that we are a nation born of immigrants and that bilingualism and biculturalism, he calls it a superpower.
Produced by Podcast Architects.
Thanks for joining us on another edition of the TALAS Partnership Spotlight. This is an opportunity for us to honor our partners who are serving districts in a special way. And with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. José Viana from Lexia Learning.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for having me.
Now, I have your bio, but instead of reading off all your accomplishments, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Lexia Learning.
Sure. And if you don't mind, I'll go all the way back. So I came to this country from Cuba, my family and I. So I started as an English learner, an emergent bilingual student myself. Now, this was back in the 70s, right, where there wasn't much research or resources to reach kids like me. It was just my teacher's will and passion and ingenuity to put me on that path to bilingualism. And that's pretty much what built my love and passion for teaching students. So I eventually became a teacher of English learner students for many years in Miami, Florida, and then kind of just did different roles. Was a school administrator. I ran the migrant education program for the state of North Carolina, and most recently, before joining Lexia, I had the honor of being the director and deputy secretary of the Office of English Language Acquisition. So I went from an English learner to being the voice for our nation's English learners and multilingual learners, which was really, truly an honor. And that's what led me to Lexia. I actually commissioned a report on English learners, emergent bilinguals, and digital learning resources. And this was before COVID, when it became an issue. And this study that we produced on digital learning resources for English learners led me to Lexia. They were doing so many incredible things with our emergent bilingual community in terms of language and literacy that talking to them, they're like, hey, why don't you join us? We can definitely use you as an advisor, and that's my role, a senior advisor for the company. Pretty much a thought partner for not just everyone in the company, but for our customers, our potential customers,
Sure.
and all of you.
So this couldn't be more timely, right? Because in the state of Texas, as you well know, scores are starting to trickle out to the school districts, our A through F accountability. And we've had a little bit of reprieve during that time of COVID. But with your insight, not only have you been a part of this for a very long time, but you've lived it. Can you give us a little bit of the state of bilingual education?
Definitely. And if you don't mind, I'll start nationally, right?
Sure.
Since I had the opportunity, even now with Lexia, to look at the state of our emergent bilinguals and what it's like nationally, and then we can definitely focus on Texas.
Absolutely.
And I always like to start with the fact that we've got a bilingual Secretary of Education. Right? He does not want us to be a monolingual country anymore. He wants us to view our English learners and our emergent bilingual students as students with assets, right, in this globally competitive world. And that's exciting. You know, Dr. Cardona realizes and recognizes that we are a nation born of immigrants and that bilingualism and biculturalism, he calls it a superpower. He's actually been visiting dual language schools throughout the country and has required the U.S. Department of Education to focus on guidance on how to obtain funding to be able to provide support for our bilingual programs. As a matter of fact, he just secured $890 million for Title III funds, which is a huge increase from previous years. And Rick, what I especially appreciate about his approach is that it goes beyond the money, right? Just handing out all these funds, because as part of his agenda, he knows that the U.S. Department of Education needs to provide states and districts with not just the funding, but the support, the
Right.
technical assistant, right? He takes it a step further than just being compliant. It's like, how do we translate this funding into a reality, which is something that I truly admire, and our nation's making great strides because of his leadership.
So in terms of, if you boil it down to Texas, what are you seeing with our local kids here in the state? And what are some of their barriers? What are some of the challenges they're going through? And then maybe what are some of the solutions that are out there?
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I have to say, when I was in OELA, the Office of English Language Acquisition, I had a national view, right? And I always have to tell everyone, including my Secretary of Education during that time, that emergent bilinguals are everywhere in the country. Utah, the Dakotas, Louisiana, and so on. And the majority of these states, they look to New York, Florida, California, and especially Texas for ideas, resources, best practices, and those kinds of things. And I have to say that Texas, they are doing a lot. There is a lot to what the TEA is doing for English learner support, including developing programs, implementation resources. They have a web portal for teachers, parents, and so on. And they go beyond the resources. I saw opportunities for school districts to be a part of, I think they call it English Learner Support Division's Zoom meetings, where they actually have a voice in what they're doing in Texas. So bilingual education is supported well in Texas. But as you mentioned, as far as some of the barriers that I've noticed in Texas and that our students in Texas are facing, I always like to first start with TEKS, right? TEKS right
Sure.
now has a strong emphasis on reading and writing. And what's interesting is the connection of reading and writing, right? I'm sure back when you and I used to teach, Rick, it was almost like two separate things that we would teach, but now it's that connection of reading and writing.
Very much so.
Right. Which to
And then
me,
in the state is going through an overhaul of how kids are learning how to read. So there couldn't be a better time to kind of infuse some of the things that you're talking about. But please continue, because I think it's fascinating of all of those connective tissues and how that works well for a student.
Exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that means more rigor on that STAR test, right? And I was reading how Texas has implemented these reading academies, and they're designed to build capacity for Texas's educators on teaching reading using this science of reading research. So you asked about barriers and challenges, and when it comes to the science of reading, I always like to remind people, right? Because the science of reading helps us comprehend how students learn to read, right? But our emergent bilingual students, our English learners, they're learning to read and also learning to read in a new language, right?
Wow. Yes.
So when we think about this, when we think about TEKS and the STAR test and this connection of reading and writing, sometimes, and our teachers in Texas being prepped on the science of reading, there should be a concern, right, that this emphasis on phonics and the focus on sounding out words might come at the expense of learning the meanings of the words, right? If you learn to decode, learning to decode words is important. We all need to do that. It doesn't matter what your native language is, but if you don't know what the words mean, it's kind of pointless. So focusing on phonics during reading instruction doesn't always equal a full literacy experience.
So would you say that, because now I'm thinking about my wife and they're getting ready to gear back up to school in Cy-Fair ISD,
Yep.
and thinking through the teachers and what they need, are they equipped to be able to support our emergent bilingual students? And if they're not, what are some of the answers to be able to do that? Because that's a worry, for me, is that, well, if you're not giving them the tools or they don't have the tools necessary, well, then how can you expect them to achieve a continued growth, which is, what we're all judged on? Yeah,
no, I mean, that's a great question, and it should be a concern, because it's exactly what you're saying. So what does this mean for emergent bilinguals who have to learn to read and learn all this foundational stuff that the teachers in Texas are learning to implement? But at the same time, learn this language, right? They're taking both assessments, STAR and TELPAS, right? So what does that mean? And I'm glad you asked that, Rick. Effective literacy instruction for emergent bilingual students requires development in both of these domains. The reading domain, right, which is what these reading academies are focused on, but we've got to also remember that there's that oral language piece. So our educators, to get over this barrier, to reach their goals, have to provide our students opportunities for speaking and listening, just like you and me are doing right now.
Sure.
Because that's the foundation where reading and writing is built. I always say, think of speaking and listening as a rehearsal or a prerequisite to reading and writing, right? Students must be able to understand and use academic spoken language in order to understand the written language. We can't expect them to comprehend what they're reading if they can't comprehend what they're listening to or words that they don't use in the spoken language.
So that just brings up all type of all the implications and knowing, as a former principal, former superintendent, and knowing how some of that instruction is delivered to our kids. We've got a lot of a long way to go. I'll just say it like that, because that's a difficult ask for teachers, right? It is. They need help. They need support. And where do they go to get that support? I mean, it kind of brings up the next question is the data. You're only as good as your data, and you're only as good as how timely that data is. We've always been struggling in education we're looking at autopsy reports, right? I mean, the schools are just now getting their scores from last year, and won't get the total district scores until September, and expected to, transition and be agile and utilize that data. What are the types of data that we need versus the types that we have in terms of supporting our emergent bilingual students?
That's a great question. And actually, even before I dive into that question, I'll share some insight that I gained and that I recommend all teachers to do, right? So we've got these reading academies prepping our teachers, but are they focusing on that oral language piece and how that influences the reading and writing piece, right? So I actually went on the TELPA site and I took some practice tests. I did it the other day. It was kind of funny. And I focused on listening and speaking domains. And Rick, I'm a bilingual educator. At least I think I'm fully bilingual, right? And it was tough. The speaking portion, for example, there's this 4-point rubric in TELPAS where it's derived from their proficiency level descriptors. And the rubric demonstrates how students will be assessed for speaking. And to score a 3 or a 4, I had to record myself and address a specific academic topic, and I had to do it with elaboration. I had to use grammar that has academic vocabulary. I had to do all of that with few pauses, and I had to have few pronunciation errors. So even my accent is something that gets evaluated.
Oh, wow.
And the listening domain was a whole other thing. I had to watch a video, listen to a story. There were several questions I had to answer about this video. And then I had to, in my own words, retell the story. And again, I'm pretty fluent and I'm an educator, and it was super challenging. So you wonder why we have a large population of long-term English learners. So what does that mean for our teachers? We need to focus on this oracy piece. That listening and speaking piece of TELPAS is so complex and so challenging. And our kids are not really given an opportunity to have discourse in class, especially our English learners. A lot of times they're focused on, with our English learners and our emergent bilingual students, they're answering simple questions or no questions at all. They don't have opportunities like this, Rick, where we're having discourse and talking and pulling from our full repertoire of language.
Why do you think that is? Is it how much time we have to address the TEKS, address the material? Is it teachers not really having the skill set to do that? What's causing that?
We'd have to go district by district, school by school.
Sure.
The opportunities that you've had of walking through classrooms and watching the teachers in action. And a lot of times, if you ask the educators, it's time, right? It's so hard to have the time to have conversations in class with your students and be able to provide that live corrective feedback to say, hey, let's say it like this, or let's try it like this, or let's elaborate, or you know what, say it in Spanish, and then let's figure out the English words that we can plug in to make it an academic answer or conversation. So a lot of it goes to timing. Some of it goes to training. We just always need to be training our teachers and teaching them the importance of providing students with this safe environment to practice their English. You can't learn a language, especially if you're not practicing speaking it. I always say learning a language is a social event. It involves conversation. It involves speaking and listening. So a lot of it is that it's practicing, and of course, going back to your original question, the data. That data that provides your educators with the information they need to provide the support to the students. And when we look at Texas emergent bilingual students and taking that TELPAS that I just told you how challenging it can be, they take it, like you said, in the spring, and then they get the results in the end of July with school starting in a few days. So you guys have waited a whole year to find out how your students progressed, and then you have a few days to use this data to inform your instruction. And like you said, districts need this continuous progress monitoring so that teachers have the actionable data they need to personalize the instruction, to give opportunities for listening and speaking in their classrooms, to get that real-time data that helps the teacher understand exactly what the learner needs to improve on in order to succeed. Not, a whole year after they've been providing these services, but day to day,
Sure.
real-time data. That's what provides the information they need.
For access to a special TEKS-aligned TALAS demo, click the link marked in the description. Submit your contact information, and a representative will be in touch within 24 hours.
So give me some specifics on that, because I'm curious to know, how would you suggest a teacher capture that? Is it the same techniques that they would use in any other class, exit tickets, or what are some of the ways that you're seeing the teachers be really effective with capturing real-time data?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first, a clarification. I've never been, Rick, and I've seen a lot of your podcasts already, and I think you're the same type of person. I've never been an either-or type of decision maker. You either focus on this formative assessment or summative assessment. It's kind of a combination of things. And usually when I have conversations and we're making decisions, whether it's at the school level or at the district level, it's important to listen to your educators. It's important to use more of a yes and let's try this. So in other words, to me, it's somewhere in the middle. It's the same case here. You've got that summative assessment. It's needed, Rick, right? It's what drives funding. It helps us, come up with programs and support for our districts and our schools. But that formative assessment piece, capturing emergent bilinguals, every utterance, looking at the activities, at their assessments, and then analyzing that data, that's how you get the targeted and time-efficient instruction. But it's what you asked the right question, and it's what teachers are asking. Yeah, Jose, that's great, but what does that look like in my classroom? And that's where I always talk about looking at your students holistically, right? To me, the best strategy for accountability, especially with emergent bilingual students, is using a comprehensive model where you focus on student growth. And like you said, it comes in many forms, and that's why I've never been one to say, no, let's do it this way. It's like, if it works in your classroom, let's do that. But look, research is also showing us this. So let's see how this fits with what you're doing, right? And that's how we can get comprehensive models that fits with your district, your school, and looks at these students holistically. I think that's the way to go. I think that's what it would look like in a classroom.
No, I mean, 100% agree. To me, it's data's like field of wheat, right? Like you ever put one of those puzzles together, like at Thanksgiving with the family, and it's got all these pieces, and there's no one piece that's going to give you the total picture. You're trying to fill in along the way, and there's usually multiple people having to fill in to get you a full perspective of what's missing and where you are in the process. And so I always try to capture it like that, like a huge puzzle, and you've got to get enough data, enough of the right data to get a picture of where students are at and where they need to go. I don't know, it's just my silly way of trying to think about all the pieces that go into instruction.
I'm going to use that. I'm going to quote Rick Fernandez.
Yeah, well, you may want to pick a cooler puzzle than Field of Wheat, but
Field of Wheat.
That's just the one I want to have. So it is what it is.
Maybe it depends on the state that I'm at. You know, like what exactly. They see more of there.
It's an oil derrick here in Texas. Like you just filling it all in. So no, that's all, yeah. Field of Wheat is all we have here. So it is what it is.
Okay.
In terms of accountability, the growth of our emergent bilingual students, how do you see that affecting the Texas A through F accountability from like this year and then moving into the future?
Oh, okay. You are putting me on the spot with this question.
Because at the end of the day, like all the superintendent's ears perk up, the principal's ears perk up, the teacher's ears, because we're like, all right, well, what does this mean for what I'm judged on, right?
I know. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've had several roles, right? So if I put on my federal expert hat on, right, I know the importance of compliance and accountability. And
Sure.
Really the only way we can get there is through, whether, labels or grades or whatever you want to call it. We do need to be on that road as well as the road where our advocates are on. So that's my other hat, the José the advocate for our English learners hat. So to me, it's somewhere in the middle where these two roads merge. So I look at your A through F accountability model, and to me, it's somewhere in the middle, right? So if I look at what it requires, it's requires heavily on this once a year standardized test, your STAR exam, right? That's how you get your grade. That's one of the pieces to getting the grade or the label that is published months after the data is collected. And then to me, always the missing link, and there's lots of states that have similar accountability systems. But what always is the missing link, Rick, and I'm sure you can testify to this, is you don't get this rating with then strategies for improvement, right? Or ways to improve these strategies. And if we put that EB lens on specifically, we hold districts accountable for things that are out of their control. School readiness, for example, when we have newcomers that are being tested 2 years after they've gotten here and are still trying to figure things out. At-risk students, things that are out of their control. There's one domain that is part of the 3 domains in your assessment there in Texas that focuses on closing the gap among subgroups, which is awesome, right? We need that. But I didn't realize this actually until our Texas emergent bilingual expert for the state, her name's Thelma, colleague and friend, brought this to my attention. And I'm like, and she made me realize that, what that means for emergent bilinguals, Jose? They are under more scrutiny, to use the word, because they're not just measured on STAR results, but TALPAS and their linguistic growth, right? Which I already mentioned how difficult TALPAS is. So if we compare this to our multilingual students who are not tested on oracy, my colleague Thelma says, wow, it's a double whammy for our emergent bilingual kids. So I don't know what you can pull out of that. As you can see, I'm somewhere in the squishy middle of this accountability assessment and what it means for emergent bilinguals. But again, it takes us back to when we started talking about data. That's why gosh, if we could find a more comprehensive approach. I always like, Rick, to start from a district strategic goals, because you know what, and you were a district superintendent for years. You know your kids better than the people in Dallas, better than the people right here in DC. You're closer to the students. You know what they need. So I'm a big believer in district strategic plans being the barometer, right, and even the foundation to these labels that we put on schools, because a comprehensive assessment that focuses on individualized growth plans should be aligned to district goals and what you guys know is right for your kids, right? And that, to me, that brings us to that holistic approach to assessing districts, schools, students, which I think is key.
So I don't want you to brag. I'm trying not to put you in a position where you got to brag, but I got to know I'm a district. I need help. I need support. We realize we're not where we want to be. Jose, come help us. What are some of the things that you all can help with?
Us, Lexia?
Yes, Lexia. Yeah.
I need help. Goodness.
You just explained that this. You're absolutely right, and Thelma's absolutely right as well. Like, it's a different level of impact for accountability that our emergent bilingual students have. And so I need help. Not only do I want to help my students, but I also understand what I'm judged on those results. So Lexia, come help me. What kind of help can I expect?
Well, and I appreciate that, Rick, because what's interesting was when I was at the federal level, even at the state level, I wasn't allowed to endorse companies or talk specifically about certain solutions, right? There were certain limitations. So coming to Lexia was this freedom all of a sudden that I can say, here's a solution. And again, it's always what fits best with your students and your district, your schools. And Lexia might not always be the best fit, but I joined Lexia because of this adaptive blended learning speaking and listening program that we have. I talked about the importance of speaking and listening, and our students not having opportunities for that. Well, this is a program that focuses on academic conversations. It actually integrates speaking, listening, and those foundational skills that your teachers are learning in these academies, right? The grammar piece. And they connect it all to our content area. So you've got emergent bilinguals not just learning the language, not just learning grammar and foundational English skills, but also mixing in science, social studies, biographies, things like that into these conversations. So they're academic conversations. And what's wonderful is we have 17 characters reflective of the top languages that are spoken in our country. So your students are having conversations with these diverse characters that, believe it or not, in some cases have a little bit of an accent to these conversations. So putting these kids in a safe space to have conversations and having these opportunities to speak in a safe environment so that they can achieve fluency. We talked about our LTELs, right? I mentioned the LTELs, and that's why they're stuck sometimes, because they don't have opportunities to speak. The classic LTEL can understand and be understood, but they make grammatical errors. I still do that, right? I have fossilized errors in my vocabulary that I can't shake out of, whether it's pronouns or articles or past and present tense. So teaching learners who know basic skills sometimes requires a little more precision. And we have this great programs that provides explicit scaffolded instruction that focuses on the grammar piece that helps get these LTELs out of that. And then we talked about assessment and ongoing progress monitoring. And again, that's where Lexia also excels. Every click, every utterance that the student makes in Lexia English gets captured and reported back to the teacher. It's all real time. We have something called assessment without testing. So they don't have to stop for a testing.
Shut down everything to test.
To test. It's everything that they're doing is being captured and reported back to the teacher live so that they can make the adjustments they need. on ways to make improved outcomes. So yeah, that's why I'm with Lexia English, and it's a tremendous solution and support for teachers of emerging bilinguals.
So I'm not letting you off the hook that easy. I need to know, okay, my district, it's been hard to hire. I've got a bunch of first year teachers. They're not going to know, number one, know how to pull the data, interpret the data, and what it means to impact their instruction. Jose, can y'all help us with all of it until I get my first year newbies up to speed?
Yeah. And one of my favorite things about working for Lexia is you've got people like me, like advisors. You have Thelma, who's an expert on emergent bilinguals. She can, go to district leaders and say, I was in your shoes. These are solutions. This is what worked for me. These were some of the challenges that we face. So it's not just a program, right? It's not just our portfolio. It's the people that are part of this company that are just incredible and are there in the journey with you. And I'll tell you straight up sometimes, I'm like, what, Lexia English might not be the best fit. You guys need to be focused more on whatever. And just having these thought partnerships. We have customer success managers that work alongside with you in this. We call it a partnership. It's not a customer.
No, it has to be. We have to trust.
Yeah.
There's got to be that trust
exactly.
there. I mean, especially with something as precious as your kids. We're not talking about, I'm ordering paper from you, right? I'm entrusting
right.
my kids. Seriously, I mean, I'm entrusting the well-being of my students, the well-being of my teachers, and ultimately the success of both. So I need that trust, and you got to be there the whole way, holding my hand most of the time. I'm gonna be honest with you. I mean, superintendents, like sometimes we need hold hands, sometimes by the collar, by the hand, it just depends.
Yeah. Appreciate that.
So I want to wrap up with, give me some calls to action, right? If districts are interested, they hear us talking, where do they go? Who do they contact? How do they get support?
Yeah, well, first, Rick, I just want to thank everyone. Thank your listeners. I mean, you guys are shaping America's future, and I really appreciate opportunities like this that you give folks to have conversations. One of your podcasts that I saw, you mentioned how, you're so focused on your district sometimes that you forget there might be a district down the road that has already gone through a challenge that you're facing. And
100%.
A lot of times we don't have opportunities like this to have these conversations. So I really appreciate this. I'm an advocate for speaking and listening, and that goes beyond what our students need. It goes into what our district leaders need, our educators need. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, and thank your listeners for providing the great teaching and learning that helps our emergent bilinguals reach their full potential. And I know in Texas, you guys are, aligned with Dr. Cardona's vision of that asset-based thinking, where emergent bilingual students, they come with assets, and that's usually the first thing I have to bring up to a district, and it's so refreshing to have a conversation with you and your fellow Texans, knowing that that's already in place, right? So again, the call to action is with this focus on the science of reading-based instruction that you guys are doing right now in the state, which is needed. All of us need that foundation. The call to action is, hey, how do you augment language into this reading instruction, right? That's how you better address the needs of our emergent bilingual students. That's how there's a more equitable literacy learning experience for them, because you're teaching them to not just read and write, but speak with confidence. And yes, please reach out to us. Again, like I mentioned, we're thought partners. I go to these meetings. I don't even know how to do like a presentation on Lexia English or our other products. I just like having a conversation. I like listening. I like coming up with solutions. And, obviously, I'm here for a reason, right? Lexia has an evidence-based portfolio. We have a staff that has been in your shoes, that is ready to support all of you out there in Texas and support you in your journey to literacy and language for your kiddos.
Well, we'll have the links in the description and all the details of
Awesome.
how you make contact if you're a district that's interested. And lastly, before I let you go, I have this question. If I put mayonnaise on my Cuban sandwich, does it still count as a Cuban sandwich instead of mustard?
Remember, Rick, I mentioned I'm not an either or, right? I'm like, bring it on. Whatever can add to the Cuban culture cuisine, we'll give it a try. Yes. So a little bit of mayo. I'm a mayo man.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm a mayo
So
guy. So I'm actually thinking, wow, I should try this out.
Well, because I like mustard, but not too much. I'd rather have mayo. But I asked for mayo one time when I was in Florida, and I got the look like, like hold on, man, you go. That's not here. Go down the street, and McDonald's will put mayonnaise on your sandwich, man. Not us. So, and it was. I remembered that. I was like, okay, yeah, hey, I get it, man. Stay true to the cuisine. So between that and a cup of Cuban coffee, which I didn't necessarily know the power of that, but learned quickly. So it was loved it, but man, I was lit up like a Christmas tree for like 3 days. So.
Well, next time you're in the South Florida area, just let me know. Maybe I can hook you up with some friends, and they can help you sort through all of this Cuban cuisine and culture if you need.
Well, Jose, man, I really enjoyed the visit, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing for our emergent bilingual students. But more than that, just being an advocate and being willing to talk and to share what the best practices are and your mission and your heart and just helping because it's the right thing to do. So I've mentioned before that we don't partner with people. I don't partner with people or have people on that I don't trust, that I wouldn't put in front of my own kids, and that I wouldn't ask for help should I need it for my kids in my district. So thank you very much for joining us, and we're going to look forward to hearing from you down the road a little bit.
Oh, great. I appreciate it, Rick. Again, and I appreciate you. Thank you so much, man.
You got it.
Produced by Podcast Architects.